The training journal was leather-bound, the corners scuffed from 2 years of being shoved into gym bags and dropped on locker room benches. Jenna carried it everywhere, pages filled with neat columns tracking splits, reps, recovery heart rates, and the small incremental victories that separated amateur athletes from champions. She'd started keeping it when she committed to her first half marathon, and now it held every workout, every setback, every breakthrough of her journey toward qualifying for the Boston Marathon. The journal sat on the front desk of Apex Performance Gym while she filled out the membership paperwork, and she didn't notice the man behind the counter glance at it twice. Full access membership, 6 months prepaid, the receptionist confirmed, sliding the contract across. That locks in your rate and gets you 2 complimentary sessions with our head trainer. Jenna signed without looking up. She'd chosen Apex because it opened at 5 a.m., had proper squat racks, and wasn't one of those boutique fitness studios where everyone wore matching athleisure and took selfies between sets. She needed strength training to fix the muscle imbalances that her physical therapist said were compromising her running form, and she needed it to fit around her schedule as a litigation associate at a mid-sized law firm. Efficient, focused, no distractions. Your first training session is tomorrow at 6 a.m. with Darius, the receptionist added. He's our strength and conditioning specialist. I don't need a trainer, Jenna said, tucking her credit card back into her wallet. I have my own program. It's included in your membership. Might as well use it. She almost argued, but her watch showed 6:47 and she had a client call at 7:30. Fine, 1 session. If you're starting your fitness journey or already deep in training for your next goal, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I want to know what brings you to the gym, because we're all in this together, pushing through 1 more rep, 1 more mile, 1 more day of showing up when it's easier not to. The next morning, Jenna arrived at 5:58 wearing her usual training uniform, black leggings, grey tank top, running shoes with exactly 127 miles on them, according to her tracking app. She found Darius near the free weight section, clipboard in hand, talking to another trainer. He was tall, built like someone who'd played college football and then discovered Olympic lifting, with close-cropped hair and the kind of presence that suggested he noticed everything happening in his gym. When he turned and caught her staring, his expression was professionally neutral. Jenna? That's me. Look, I appreciate the complimentary session, but I really just need access to the equipment. I've been training for 3 years, and I know what works for my body. He glanced at the training journal tucked under her arm. What are you training for? Boston qualifier. I need a 3:30 marathon. Current PR? 3:47:22. Chicago, last October. And you think strength training is going to take 17 minutes off your time? There was something in the way he said it, not quite condescending but definitely skeptical, that made her shoulders tense. My PT identified bilateral hip weakness and excessive ankle pronation. Strengthening my posterior chain should improve my stride efficiency. Your PT gave you exercises, a full program, deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, single leg RDLs, glute bridges. Darius set down his clipboard. Show me your deadlift. I don't need to audition. You're about to load weight onto a barbell in my gym. I need to see that you can do it safely. That's not negotiable. Jenna felt heat rise in her face, the particular flavor of irritation that came from having her competence questioned. She'd graduated summa cum laude from a top 20 law school. She'd run 6 marathons. She'd taught herself biomechanics from YouTube videos and coaching forums. She didn't need some gym instructor treating her like she'd wandered in off the street without knowing the difference between a barbell and a broomstick. Fine. She walked to the deadlift platform, loaded 2 45-pound plates onto the bar, and set her feet hip-width apart. The setup felt right. Shoulders over the bar, chest up, core braced. She'd watched dozens of tutorials, practiced with lighter weights at her apartment gym. When she pulled, the bar came up smoothly. Stop. Darius was beside her before she'd locked out the rep. His hand didn't touch the bar, but his proximity made her hesitate and set it down. Your hips shot up first, he said. You're pulling almost entirely with your lower back. Do that under real load and you'll herniate a disc inside 3 weeks. I've been doing deadlifts for 6 months. With what weight? I started at 95 pounds. I'm up to 135. And you feel it where? The question caught her off guard. My lower back. But that's normal, right? It's a back exercise. It's a posterior chain exercise. You should feel it in your hamstrings and glutes, with your spinal erectors stabilizing. If your back is doing all the work, your form is compensating for weak glutes and poor hip hinge mechanics. He demonstrated the proper setup, his movements precise and controlled. You're an anterior dominant athlete. Quad and hip flexor overactive, glutes underactive. Classic runner pattern. If you keep training the way you're training, you won't get to Boston. You'll get to an orthopedic surgeon. Jenna's jaw tightened. You don't know my body. I know mechanical dysfunction when I see it. And I know what happens to runners who try to fix years of imbalance with 6 months of poorly executed compound lifts. Then I guess it's good this is a complimentary session, because I won't be booking another. She grabbed her journal and water bottle and headed for the treadmills, her pulse elevated in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. Who the hell did he think he was? She'd come here to get stronger, not to be lectured like a novice who didn't understand her own training. She'd done the research, followed the protocols, tracked her progress religiously. And now this instructor, who'd watched her do exactly 1 rep, presumed to tell her she was doing everything wrong. She ran 8 miles at tempo pace, letting the familiar rhythm bleed off her frustration. By the time she finished, the gym had filled with the early morning crowd. Lawyers and consultants and medical residents stealing an hour before the day consumed them. Darius was training someone through front squats, his voice carrying across the floor with the same calm authority he'd used on her. She watched him for 30 seconds longer than necessary, noticing the way he adjusted the client's elbow position with careful precision, the way he counted reps in a steady cadence that probably made even brutal sets feel manageable. Then she left, without saying goodbye. Over the next 2 weeks, Jenna developed a careful routine designed to avoid Darius entirely. She came at 5:15 before he arrived and finished her strength work by 6:30. She used the machines instead of free weights when possible, and when she had to use barbells, she kept the weight light and her back to the training floor. It was inefficient and probably petty, but the alternative was enduring another interaction where he questioned her judgment, and she had to defend credentials he had no reason to doubt. The avoidance worked until the morning her hip started clicking. It happened during her warm-up run, a sensation like something catching and releasing in the socket with every stride. Not painful exactly, but wrong in a way that made her nervous. She cut the run short and moved to the strength circuit, but the clicking persisted through squats and lunges, louder with each rep. By the time she attempted Bulgarian split squats, her right hip was actively aching. She was standing in front of the mirror, 1 foot elevated on a bench, trying to figure out if the pain was muscular or structural, when Darius appeared beside her. "You're favoring your left side." "I'm fine." "Your right hip is internally rotating and your knee is tracking inward. That's either compensation for pain or a mobility restriction." Jenna stepped off the bench. "It's just tight." "When did it start?" "This morning. It's nothing." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not judgment, but something closer to resignation. "You're going to keep training on it." "I have a long run Sunday, 18 miles. "You have a hip that's already compromised. Load it for 18 miles and you'll be looking at weeks of PT, maybe months." "You're not my doctor." "No, but I've seen this exact injury pattern destroy 3 competitive runners in the last 2 years. All of them ignored the early warning signs. All of them thought they could train through it. One of them needed surgery." The gym felt suddenly too bright, too loud, too full of witnesses to this conversation she didn't want to have. Jenna grabbed her journal and headed for the locker room, but the clicking in her hip followed her with every step, a small mechanical betrayal that proved Darius right. She didn't go to the gym Thursday or Friday. Instead, she iced her hip, took ibuprofen, and researched hip impingement and labral tears until her eyes burned. The internet offered 100 contradictory explanations and 0 comfort. By Saturday afternoon, the hip felt better, or at least quiet enough that she convinced herself Sunday's long run was still possible. She started at a conservative pace, 8:45 per mile, letting her body warm into the effort. The first 5 miles felt good. Mile 6 was where the clicking returned, softer now but unmistakable. By mile 8, the ache had spread from her hip into her lower back, a deep, grinding discomfort that made her stride shorten. She stopped at a park bench, stretched, rolled out her IT band against a tree trunk, and kept going. Mile 12 was when her hip gave out. Not dramatically, not with a pop or tear, but with a sudden loss of stability that sent her stumbling mid-stride. She caught herself on a street sign, her breathing harsh and uneven, and tried to take another step. Her right leg wouldn't bear weight properly. The pain was sharp now, specific, radiating from deep in the joint. She called a rideshare and spent the 10-minute drive home trying not to cry from frustration more than pain. By the time she limped into her apartment, her hip had stiffened completely. She couldn't lift her knee above waist height. She couldn't rotate the joint without wincing. And she absolutely couldn't run. Monday morning, she showed up at Apex at 6:15 with her hip wrapped and her pride in pieces. Darius was restocking weight plates when she found him. He took one look at her gait and set down the 45-pounder he'd been holding. "I ran anyway," she said before he could ask. "How far did you make it?" 12 miles before it went bad. I had to stop at 14. He nodded slowly, no satisfaction in his expression, just the weary recognition of someone who'd predicted this exact outcome. "Can you do a straight leg raise?" She tried. Her hip flexor spasmed before she got her foot 6 inches off the ground. "You need to see a sports medicine doctor, today if possible." "I know. And you need to stop training until you get clearance." "I know that too." She met his eyes, forcing herself to hold the gaze. "You were right. About my form, about the compensation patterns, about all of it. I should have listened." Darius picked up the weight plate again, slid it onto the rack with careful precision. "Most people don't come back after I tell them their training is broken. They go to another gym where someone will let them hurt themselves in peace. I signed a 6-month contract. Prepaid." The corner of his mouth twitched. "That's the only reason?" Jenna shifted her weight, testing the hip. It screamed at her. "I want to qualify for Boston, and apparently I can't do that by myself. No guarantees. If you've got a labral tear or structural damage, you might be looking at a long layoff. But if I don't, then we rebuild from the ground up, mobility work, activation drills, corrective exercises, and eventually, when you've earned it, we touch a barbell again. It's going to be slow and boring, and you're going to hate every minute of it." "When can we start?" "As soon as your doctor clears you for rehab." He pulled out his phone. "I'm going to send you the name of a sports medicine physician who works with runners. Tell her I referred you and she'll get you in fast. In the meantime, ice and rest. No running, no strength training, no testing the injury to see if it feels better." She took the contact information, saved it to her phone, and realized she was still holding her training journal. She'd brought it reflexively, the same way she brought her keys and wallet even though she couldn't train. The pages felt heavier now, full of data that had led her precisely nowhere. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "When you looked at my deadlift that first day, what did you see?" Darius considered the question. "I saw someone who'd taught themselves from videos and articles, which is better than nothing. But videos can't see your hip anatomy, or your ankle mobility, or the fact that your right glute isn't firing correctly. They can't catch the compensations your body learned to make over thousands of miles of running. So you ended up with textbook form that was completely wrong for your specific mechanics. Why didn't you just tell me that?" "I tried. You weren't interested in hearing it." He was right, and they both knew it. Jenna had been so invested in proving she didn't need help that she'd ignored the evidence right in front of her. It was the same personality trait that made her a good attorney, stubborn, self-reliant, unwilling to concede a point, but in this context, it had become a liability. "If the doctor clears me," she said carefully, "and if I come back for actual training, not just complimentary sessions, I need you to tell me when I'm being an idiot. That's included in the rate." She almost smiled. "Almost. What's your rate?" $60 per hour or $400 for a package of 8 sessions. But we're not talking rates until you get medical clearance. Go see the doctor. Follow her recommendations. Then come find me. The sports medicine physician confirmed a moderate hip impingement with early signs of labral fraying, not torn, but irritated enough to cause instability. She prescribed 6 weeks of physical therapy, focusing on hip mobility and glute activation, with a strict prohibition on running. Jenna followed the protocol with the same obsessive precision she'd brought to her flawed training program, showing up to PT twice a week and doing her home exercises with metronomic consistency. During week 3, she returned to Apex for the first time since the injury. Darius met her in the stretching area with a foam roller and an expression that suggested he'd been expecting her. "Doctor cleared you for modified training. For mobility work and bodyweight exercises. No impact, no loaded movements yet." "Good. We're starting with the basics." He demonstrated a series of hip mobility drills, 90-90 stretches, fire hydrants, clamshells, glute bridges with a resistance band. These aren't sexy. They're not going to make you feel like an athlete, but they're going to fix the dysfunction that broke you in the first place. She worked through the exercises under his supervision, feeling muscles activate that she'd forgotten existed. Her glutes burned within 30 seconds of banded bridges. Her hip flexors screamed during the 90-90 stretches. Darius watched every rep, correcting her position with verbal cues and occasional physical adjustments. A hand on her lower back to prevent overextension, fingers on her knee to ensure proper tracking. "You're compensating with your quads again," he said during single-leg deadlifts. "Drive through your heel, think about pushing the floor away instead of lifting your body up." She tried again. Something clicked, not in her hip this time, but in her understanding of the movement. Her hamstring engaged, her glute fired. The exercise felt completely different. "There it is," Darius said. "That's the pattern we're building." Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Jenna came to the gym 4 mornings a week at 6 a.m., and Darius put her through progressively harder variations of the corrective exercises. They added resistance bands, then light dumbbells, then carefully monitored bilateral movements. He taught her how to hip hinge properly, how to maintain a neutral spine under load, how to breathe and brace and create tension in the right places. She started to notice things about him that hadn't registered during their contentious first meeting. The way he customized every program to the specific person in front of him, never recycling workouts or falling back on generic templates. The way he remembered details from previous sessions, which exercises caused pain, which cues worked best, what goals mattered most. The way he celebrated small victories with the same enthusiasm, whether someone deadlifted 400 pounds or successfully completed a pain-free bodyweight squat. "You're good at this," she said one morning, after a particularly brutal set of single-leg Romanian deadlifts, "at making you suffer, at seeing what people need instead of what they think they want." Darius finished noting her reps in his training log. "Most people come to the gym with a specific goal and a specific idea of how to get there. When you tell them their idea is wrong, they hear it as criticism. But the goal isn't wrong, just the path. My job is to show them a better route. Even when they don't want to hear it, especially then." At week 8, her PT cleared her to start running again. The protocol was conservative. 10-minute easy runs 3 times per week with rest days between. No speed work, no hills, no testing her limits. Jenna followed the plan exactly, and for the first time in her training history, running felt effortless instead of like a battle against her own body. "My stride feels different," she told Darius during their next session. "That's because your hips are moving correctly now. You're getting better extension, better force transfer. Your body isn't fighting itself anymore." She loaded the barbell for her first real deadlift in 3 months, 135 pounds, the same weight that had exposed her broken form back in November. This time when she pulled, she felt it in her hamstrings and glutes exactly where Darius said she should. The bar path was vertical. Her back stayed neutral. She locked out smoothly and set the weight down with control. "Clean rep," Darius said. "How'd it feel?" "Like I've never deadlifted before in my life. Everything is different." "That's because you've got 10 weeks of motor pattern reprogramming under your belt. Your nervous system knows how to recruit the right muscles now. We can start adding weight." They added 5 pounds per week, slow and patient, building strength on top of the mobility and stability she'd developed through PT and corrective work. By March, she was deadlifting 200 pounds for reps and running 40 miles per week without pain. Her training journal filled with new data, but now the numbers told a story of sustainable progress instead of mounting dysfunction. Somewhere in the process, her feelings about Darius shifted. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. She didn't have a moment of clarity where she looked at him demonstrating a goblet squat and suddenly saw him differently. Instead, it accumulated in small increments. The sound of his voice counting down the final seconds of a plank hold, the careful way he wrapped her knees before heavy squats, the dry humor that surfaced when she complained about burpees. She found herself arriving at the gym earlier than necessary, just to watch him work with other clients. She stayed later than her program required, inventing reasons to stretch near wherever he was training. She started noticing details that had nothing to do with coaching: the scar on his left forearm, the reading glasses he wore when reviewing training logs, the way his entire face changed when he smiled at something genuinely funny. One morning in early April, she was struggling through weighted step-ups when her balance wavered, and Darius caught her elbow to steady her. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds, professional and practical, but her pulse spiked in a way that had nothing to do with the exercise. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah. Just lost my footing." He released her arm and stepped back to his usual coaching distance, but she could still feel the warmth of his hand. She finished the set badly, her concentration shattered, and when she checked her reflection in the mirror, she saw her face was flushed. This was a problem. She didn't date clients of her law firm. She didn't date co-workers. She definitely didn't develop feelings for her personal trainer, because that was a cliché so obvious it showed up in romantic comedies and self-help books about boundaries. And yet, here she was, 29 years old and professionally accomplished, feeling like a teenager with a crush every time Darius demonstrated a deadlift. She tried to logic her way out of it. Their relationship was transactional. She paid him, he coached her. The dynamic was inherently unequal. Getting emotionally involved would compromise the training, which was the best training she'd ever received and possibly the only thing standing between her and another injury. Any romantic overture would be inappropriate and unwelcome, except she kept catching him looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It happened during rest periods, when she was drinking water and staring at the wall to recover between sets. She'd glance up and find his gaze on her, not evaluating her form or planning the next exercise, just looking. He'd refocus immediately, professional mask back in place, but the moment lingered. One morning she brought him coffee. It was impulse, barely thought through. She'd stopped at the cafe across from her office building and ordered 2 lattes instead of 1, and now she was standing in front of Darius with an extra cup extended like an offering. "I didn't know how you'd take it, so I got it with oat milk and 1 sugar," she said. He took the cup carefully as if it might be a trap. "You didn't have to do this." "I know, I wanted to." They stood there for a beat too long, the gym noise receding into background static. Then another client arrived for a 6:30 session, and the moment broke. "Thank you," Darius said. "We should get you warmed up." The coffee became a Tuesday ritual. She'd bring 2 lattes, they'd drink them while reviewing the week's training plan, and then they'd get to work. It was a small thing, barely intimate, but it felt like permission to acknowledge that their relationship had developed beyond trainer and client into something more nuanced. In May, she ran a half marathon as a fitness test, targeting an 8:30 pace that would indicate readiness for a full marathon build-up. She crossed the finish line at 1:44:32, negative split, feeling strong. When she texted Darius the result, he responded with a single word: ready. They met that afternoon at the gym, not for a session, but to plan her Boston qualifier attempt. Darius had pulled up a training calendar on his laptop, blocks of color representing different workout types across 18 weeks. "Chicago Marathon is October 13th, he said. "That gives us 23 weeks if we start the formal build-up now. 4 weeks of base building, 12 weeks of progressive overload, then a 3-week taper." Jenna studied the calendar, trying to absorb the scope of what he was proposing. "You've done this before. I coached 2 runners through Boston qualifiers. Both of them made it. What happened to the third?" "She got injured in week 14. Tried to make up for a missed long run by adding too many miles too fast." His expression darkened. I should have caught it earlier. Should have made her take an extra rest day instead of letting her swap the schedule around. She made the choice. I was her coach. I'm supposed to know when to override bad choices. Jenna heard the guilt in his voice and recognized it. This was why he'd been so insistent about her form back in December, why he'd warned her about training through hip pain, why he approached every session with careful precision. Someone had gotten hurt on his watch, and he'd decided it would never happen again. I trust you, she said. He looked up from the laptop. That's a lot of responsibility. You've earned it. The training build-up started the following Monday. Long runs on Sunday, tempo runs on Wednesday, interval sessions on Friday with strength training Tuesday and Thursday to maintain the stability and power they'd built. Darius adjusted her program weekly based on her recovery metrics and perceived exertion, sometimes adding rest when she wanted to push, occasionally pressing harder when she felt conservative. They talked during sessions now, real conversations that went beyond exercise coaching. She learned that he'd played Division II football at a state school, tore his ACL junior year, and discovered he liked training more than competing, that he'd worked at 3 different gyms before finding Apex, which gave him enough autonomy to train the way he believed was right, instead of following corporate protocols, that he'd grown up in a neighborhood where athletic talent was the only reliable path out, and he'd taken it as far as it would go before his body broke down. Do you regret it? She asked. The football career that didn't happen? Sometimes. Mostly I'm grateful I figured out what I actually wanted to do before I wasted more time chasing someone else's dream. He loaded weight onto the barbell for her next squat set. What about you? You always want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a writer, fiction, but that felt impractical, so I went to law school instead. You ever write anymore? Briefs and memos. Does that count? Not even close. She laughed, surprising herself. Maybe after Boston. If I qualify, I'll write something, celebrate properly. When you qualify, he corrected. Not if. The confidence in his voice made something warm unfold in her chest. She wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted to believe in the version of herself he seemed to see, not broken or dysfunctional, but capable of transformation. By August, she was running 70 miles per week and deadlifting 240 pounds. Her long runs stretched to 22 miles, practiced at marathon pace to teach her body the specific metabolic demands of racing. Every Sunday, she'd finish the run and text Darius a summary. Mileage, average pace, how she felt. Every Sunday, he'd respond with a detailed analysis and adjustments for the coming week. But they didn't see each other outside the gym. Jenna had convinced herself this was appropriate. He was her coach, the relationship was professional, and any attempt to change that dynamic risked destroying the thing that had helped her become a better athlete. Except the boundary felt increasingly artificial, especially during Thursday strength sessions when they'd work out side by side, and she'd catch herself memorizing the way his shoulders moved during pull-ups. 3 weeks before Chicago, during an easy recovery run, her left Achilles started aching. She stopped immediately, walked home, iced it, and texted Darius a description of the pain. He called instead of texting back. Where exactly do you feel it? His voice was tight with concern. 2 inches above my heel. It's sore but not sharp. Can you do a single leg calf raise? She tried. The Achilles complained but held. Yeah, but it's uncomfortable. No running until I see you in person. Come to the gym tomorrow morning. She showed up at 5:45, anxiety thrumming under her skin. 3 weeks out from race day was too close to develop a real injury, but too far out to just rest and hope it resolved. Darius met her with an assessment protocol, palpation, range of motion testing, strength measurements. His hands were clinical and impersonal, but she felt every point of contact like a brand. It's not a rupture or a tear, he said finally. Probably just reactive tendinopathy from the mileage spike last week, but we need to be careful. What does careful mean? Modified training for the next week, pool running instead of road running, more frequent icing, eccentric heel drops twice a day. If it settles down, we can resume normal training with reduced volume. If it doesn't, we're looking at a last-minute race withdrawal. The possibility hit her like cold water. I've trained for 6 months. I know, but showing up to Chicago injured is worse than not showing up at all. You'd either DNF or push through and cause permanent damage. He sat back on his heels, meeting her eyes. We have time to fix this if you follow the protocol exactly. No improvising, no testing it to see if it feels better. Trust the process. She spent the next week running in the pool with a flotation belt, maintaining her cardiovascular fitness without impact stress. The Achilles gradually quieted, from constant soreness to occasional twinges to finally nothing. Darius cleared her to resume running with a reduced schedule. 12 miles for her final long run instead of 20, shorter intervals, more recovery time. "You're fit enough," he said. "The work is done. Now we just need to keep you healthy until race day." The taper was harder than the training. With less mileage to occupy her mind, Jenna's anxiety bloomed. She obsessed over weather forecasts for Chicago, scrutinized elevation profiles of the course, second-guessed her fueling strategy. Darius talked her down every time, reminding her that she'd done everything right, that her body was ready, that the only thing left to do was trust herself. 2 days before the race, she flew to Chicago. Darius texted her that evening. "Get good sleep. Eat what you've practiced eating. Don't run more than 15 minutes tomorrow. You're ready for this." She wanted to tell him that his belief meant more than any training plan, that these 6 months had given her something beyond race fitness. Instead, she typed, "Thank you for everything." The response came immediately. "Go get your qualifier." Race morning was cool and overcast, perfect conditions. Jenna lined up in Corral D with a watch set for 8 miles pace and a simple race plan. Consistent effort, trust her training. Don't panic if the early miles feel hard. When the gun went off, she settled into rhythm and let the thousands of other runners carry her forward. The first half felt controlled. She hit the halfway mat at 1:44:30, exactly on pace. Miles 14 through 18 were hard, her legs heavy and her breathing labored, but she'd trained for this feeling and knew it would pass. At mile 20, she checked her watch and realized she had 9 minutes of cushion. Unless something catastrophic happened, she was going to qualify. She ran the final 10K on pure emotion, tears streaming down her face, her body executing the movement patterns that Darius had drilled into her over hundreds of hours. When she crossed the finish line at 3:28:17, she doubled over with her hands on her knees and sobbed. She didn't text Darius immediately. Instead, she sat in the finishers area, wrapped in a mylar blanket, letting the reality settle. She'd qualified for Boston. After 2 years of chasing this goal, after injury and setback and having to rebuild her entire approach to training, she'd actually done it. When she finally pulled out her phone, she saw that Darius had been tracking her splits. 3:28:17. "I knew you had it in you. Congratulations." She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "Couldn't have done it without you." His response took longer than usual. "You did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." She flew home Monday afternoon and went straight to the gym Tuesday morning. Darius was training a client through bench press, but when he saw her, he excused himself and crossed the floor to where she stood. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sore everywhere. Happy. Kind of lost, honestly. I've been chasing this goal for so long that I'm not sure what comes next. Boston registration opens next week. You could run that in April. Maybe. Or maybe I take some time to figure out what I actually want, instead of what I think I should want." She shifted her weight, testing her legs. They felt trashed but functional. "I owe you a proper thank you. Dinner. My treat." Something changed in his expression. Surprise, then caution, then something she couldn't quite read. "You don't owe me anything." "I know. But I'd like to anyway, if you want to." The silence stretched between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said over 6 months of training together. Then Darius smiled, and it was the real smile, the one that transformed his entire face. "Yeah, I'd like that." They went to a Thai restaurant near the gym, a neighborhood place with mismatched chairs and authentic spice levels. Jenna ordered crying tiger beef and watched Darius navigate the menu with the same careful consideration he brought to training programming. Without the context of the gym around them, the dynamic felt different, more equal, less defined by their roles. "Can I ask you something?" she said, after the waiter brought their drinks. "Go ahead." "When I first came to Apex and you criticized my deadlift, were you trying to get rid of me?" Darius laughed. "No, why would you think that?" "Because I was so defensive and difficult, most trainers would have just let me hurt myself rather than deal with the attitude. Most trainers haven't watched someone they care about end up in surgery because they missed the warning signs." He took a drink of water. "After Maya, the runner I mentioned who got injured, I promised myself I'd never let someone train wrong just because telling them the truth was uncomfortable, even if they hated me for it. I didn't hate you. You looked like you wanted to. I hated that you were right. That's different." The food arrived, absurdly spicy, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Jenna found herself studying Darius in this new context, noticing details she'd overlooked in the gym. The way he talked with his hands when explaining something complex, the slight Louisiana accent that surfaced on certain words, the fact that he was nervous, his usual confidence tempered by the uncertainty of being here with her as something other than her coach. "So, what comes after Boston?" he asked. "Assuming you decide to run it." "I don't know yet. Maybe I'll finally write that story I've been putting off for 10 years. Maybe I'll try a different distance, ultra-marathon or something completely different like triathlon. Or maybe I'll just run for fun instead of chasing qualifications." She paused. "What about you? What's next for the best coach I've ever had?" "I'm opening my own gym." The announcement surprised her. "When?" "Lease is signed for January 1st. It's a smaller space, just strength and conditioning. None of the cardio equipment or group fitness classes. I want to focus on working with athletes, runners, lifters, people training for specific goals instead of just general fitness." "That's amazing. Why didn't you tell me before?" "I was waiting until after Chicago. Didn't want to distract you." Jenna felt something settle into place, a clarity she hadn't expected. "I want to keep training with you. At the new gym, I mean. If you'll have me. You'll be my first client. Already have your name on the schedule." They finished dinner and walked back toward the parking lot, the October night cool but not cold. When they reached Jenna's car, she turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the training, but for seeing what I needed when I couldn't see it myself." "Jenna, I'm not finished. I know this complicates things, and I know there are professional boundaries that matter, but I need you to know that somewhere over the last 6 months, I stopped thinking of you as just my coach. And I hope, that maybe you feel the same way." Darius didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "I've been trying not to feel this way since about week 3, he said quietly. "Told myself it was inappropriate, that I needed to stay professional, that you were just another client, but you're not. You never were. So what do we do about it?" "I don't know. Figure it out together?" She kissed him then, rising on her toes to close the distance between them, and he responded immediately, one hand cupping her face while the other settled at the small of her back. The kiss was slow and thorough, 6 months of restraint dissolving into something warm and certain. When they finally pulled apart, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "For the record," he said, "this is the least professional thing I've ever done." "Good. I'm tired of being professional." They saw each other 3 times in the next week. Coffee on Wednesday, a movie on Friday, dinner at her apartment on Sunday where they talked until 2 in the morning about everything they'd been carefully not discussing during training sessions. Jen had learned that he read science fiction and listened to jazz and had a younger sister who taught elementary school in Houston. Darius learned that she'd run her first marathon to prove something to herself after a bad breakup, that she stress-baked elaborate desserts, that she'd never actually liked being a lawyer but couldn't quite figure out what else to do with her life. "You could write," he suggested, "and make no money. You could make some money and be happy instead of good money and miserable." The conversation stayed with her. That night she opened a new document on her laptop and started writing, not a brief or a memo, but an actual story about a woman who learned to run. The words came slowly at first, then faster, and when she finally looked up, 3 hours had passed, and she had 20 pages. She sent them to Darius the next morning with a message. "You're a bad influence." His response, "You're welcome." By November, they'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Jenna trained at his gym 3 mornings a week, and they spent weekends together exploring the city, trying new restaurants, sometimes just staying in and reading side by side on the couch. The relationship felt natural in a way her previous relationships never had, built on mutual respect and shared goals instead of chemistry alone. One Saturday afternoon, they were at the construction site of his new gym, painting walls and assembling equipment. Jenna was struggling with an Allen wrench and a squat rack when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. "Is this Jenna Morrison?" The voice was female, professional. "Yes?" "This is Stephanie Chen from Runner's World. I'm calling about your Chicago Marathon qualifier. We're doing a feature on runners who overcame injuries to achieve their goals, and your story came up in our research. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" Jenna's mind went blank. "How did you find me?" "Your race result was flagged in our database because of the significant improvement from your previous marathon time. When we investigated, we found social media posts about your injury and recovery. It's exactly the kind of narrative our readers love." She looked at Darius, who'd stopped working to watch her. "Can I think about it and call you back?" "Of course, I'll send you my contact information via email." When she hung up, Darius raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Runner's World wants to interview me about Chicago." "That's incredible. You're going to do it, right?" "I don't know. Talking about the injury means talking about you, and I'm not sure how to explain what you did without making it sound like you fixed me." He set down the wrench he'd been holding and came to sit beside her on the concrete floor. "I didn't fix you. You fixed yourself. I just gave you better tools." That's not how the story works. Everyone wants the dramatic transformation. Broken runner meets coach. Coach rebuilds runner. Runner achieves impossible goal. It's reductive, and it makes you into some kind of savior figure when the reality was much messier. So tell them the messy version. Tell them you were stubborn and I was pushy, and it took 3 months before you trusted me enough to actually listen. Tell them you did the work, even when it was boring and painful and slow. That's a better story than the one they're expecting. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been hanging out with this really smart lawyer. Some of it must have rubbed off." The Runner's World interview happened 2 weeks later, conducted over the phone while Jenna sat in her apartment with notes spread across the coffee table. She told the journalist about the hip impingement, about her initial resistance to changing her training, about the slow process of rebuilding her mechanics from the ground up. She talked about Darius, carefully framing him not as a miracle worker, but as a knowledgeable coach who'd refused to let her train wrong, even when she'd resented him for it. The article ran in the February issue, a 4-page spread with photos from Chicago and a detailed breakdown of her training journey. The headline read, "The Humbling, How One Runner Learned to Start Over." Jenna read it 3 times, looking for places where her story had been simplified or sensationalized, but the journalist had captured everything accurately, including the part where she admitted that her biggest obstacle had been her own ego. Darius read it over her shoulder. "You sound like someone worth listening to." "I sound like someone who almost destroyed her running career through stubbornness." "That too. But you also sound honest." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you." In April, Jenna ran Boston. She didn't chase a time goal, just ran to experience the race she'd dreamed about for years. Darius flew out to watch, standing at mile 21 with a sign that read, "You've already won." When she crossed the finish line at 3:35:48, he was waiting with flowers and the kind of smile that made her forget about her destroyed quads. They spent the next day wandering around the city, eating victory meals and talking about the future. Darius's gym was thriving, his roster full of clients who wanted the kind of individualized programming he specialized in. Jenna had started working part-time at the law firm, using her free hours to write. Not just the story about running, but other stories too, personal essays and short fiction that she submitted to literary magazines with no expectation of acceptance. 3 got rejected. 1 got published. "You're a professional writer now." Darius said when she showed him the acceptance email. "I made $50. Doesn't matter, you got paid to write. That's the definition of professional." She wanted to argue, but he was technically correct. Instead, she kissed him, and they ended up staying in bed until noon, talking and laughing and planning the rest of their lives in broad strokes that felt more exciting than scary. 1 year after she'd first walked into Apex Performance Gym with her training journal and her broken mechanics, Jenna stood in Darius's new gym, helping him prepare for a client showcase. The event was designed to demonstrate his training philosophy to potential clients, real athletes working through real programs, not choreographed fitness theater. She'd volunteered to help with setup and logistics, which meant she'd spent the morning arranging equipment and greeting nervous participants. "You nervous?" she asked Darius during a quiet moment. "About what?" "Having people judge your work." He adjusted the height on a squat rack. "They're not judging my work. They're seeing if my approach fits what they need. If it does, great. If it doesn't, they'll find another coach. No judgment required." That confidence, earned through years of getting results and refining his methods, was one of the things she loved most about him. He didn't need external validation because he knew what worked. But he also stayed humble enough to keep learning, to admit when he was wrong, to adjust when evidence suggested a better path. The showcase went well. Darius coached 5 clients through customized sessions, while potential clients watched from the sidelines, asking questions and taking notes. Jenna recognized the transformation happening in real time, skeptics becoming believers as they saw how precisely Darius could diagnose movement dysfunction and prescribe corrections. By the end of the day, he'd booked 8 new consultations. "You're going to need to hire another coach," Jenna said as they locked up the gym. "I know. I've got someone in mind, a former college strength coach who's looking for a smaller, more focused training environment. I'm meeting with her next week." They drove to Jenna's apartment and collapsed on the couch, both exhausted but satisfied. Darius pulled her against his side and she settled in, feeling the comfortable weight of his arm across her shoulders. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about us and the future and what comes next." Jenna's pulse quickened. "Okay. My lease is up in August. I was planning to renew, but I've been wondering if maybe we should look for a place together instead. Only if you want to. No pressure." She turned to face him. "You want to move in together? I want to wake up next to you every morning instead of 3 mornings a week. I want to cook dinner together and fight about whose turn it is to do laundry and build something permanent instead of always planning around 2 separate apartments." He paused. "But if you're not ready, that's fine. We can keep things the way they are." Jenna thought about her apartment, the 1 bedroom with the 2 small closet and the neighbor who played loud music at midnight. She thought about Darius's place, equally cramped, with a kitchen that barely fit 1 person. And she thought about what it would mean to share space with someone, to make that kind of commitment, to acknowledge that this relationship wasn't temporary or transitional, but the thing she wanted to build her life around. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's find a place together." They spent May looking at apartments, negotiating their different priorities, and discovering surprising compatibility. Jenna wanted natural light and space for a writing desk. Darius wanted a functional kitchen and room for a home gym setup. They found a 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, halfway between the gym and Jenna's office, with hardwood floors and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Moving in together was chaotic and revealing. Jenna discovered that Darius was fanatically organized about his training equipment, but careless with mail and paperwork. Darius learned that Jenna couldn't cook without creating a disaster zone and talked to herself while writing. They argued about furniture placement and grocery shopping habits and whether the thermostat should be set at 68 or 72 degrees. But they also fell into rhythms that felt inevitable. Weekend morning runs together, trading off who made coffee, reading in companionable silence while rain drummed against the windows. Jenna set up her writing desk in the 2nd bedroom, and Darius built a minimalist home gym in the corner with a barbell, plates, and a pull-up bar. The apartment became a space that belonged to both of them, filled with shared routines and accumulated moments. In June, Jenna quit her job at the law firm. It wasn't impulsive. She'd been building her freelance writing for months, pitching essays to magazines and online publications, slowly constructing an income that wouldn't replace her legal salary but might be enough to live on if she was careful. When she told Darius her plan, he listened without interrupting, then asked the practical questions. What was her financial runway? What was her backup plan? How would she handle health insurance? "I've got 6 months of expenses saved," she said, "and I can pick up contract legal work if the writing doesn't generate enough income. But I need to try this for real, not just as a side project I do when I'm too tired to think." "Then try it. I believe in you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Darius had watched her qualify for Boston. He'd seen her publish her first paid piece. He knew what she was capable of when she committed fully instead of hedging her bets. His belief gave her permission to believe in herself. Her last day at the firm was bittersweet. She'd spent 5 years building expertise in commercial litigation, developing relationships with partners and clients, proving she could do the work. Walking away felt like abandoning an identity she'd constructed carefully over years, but it also felt like finally admitting the truth. She'd become a lawyer because it seemed responsible, not because it made her happy. That summer, she wrote long-form essays about running and injury and the psychology of endurance, personal narratives about learning to trust someone else's expertise, reported pieces about the fitness industry and coaching ethics. Some of them got rejected, some of them got published. She made enough money to cover her share of rent and groceries barely, and Darius never once suggested she should go back to law. One evening in August, she was struggling with a draft that refused to come together, when Darius came home with takeout and a determined expression. "You need a break," he said, setting containers on the kitchen table. "I'm on deadline." "You've been staring at that screen for 6 hours. The words aren't getting better. Eat dinner, take a walk, let your brain reset." He was right, annoyingly. Jenna saved the document and joined him at the table, accepting the pad thai he'd ordered for her. They ate in comfortable silence until Darius set down his fork. "I got offered a partnership opportunity," he said. "With who?" "A physical therapy clinic downtown. They want to expand into strength and conditioning, and they're looking for someone to build out that program. It would mean steady income, benefits, infrastructure support, but it would also mean giving up some autonomy and probably working with a higher volume of clients." Jenna considered this. "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what you think." "That's not an answer," he smiled. "I think I want to stay independent. The clinic opportunity is solid, but it's not what I built my gym to be. I like working with serious athletes who are willing to do the hard, boring work. I like being able to refuse clients who aren't a good fit. I don't want to scale up just because scaling is what you're supposed to do." "Then don't. Even if it means less financial security, you've built something you're proud of. That's worth more than a steady paycheck." She reached across the table for his hand. "We'll figure out the money stuff. We always do." They finished dinner and went for a walk through the neighborhood, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. When they returned to the apartment, Jenna opened her laptop, and the words that had been stuck all day suddenly flowed. She finished the essay at midnight, sent it to her editor, and crawled into bed next to Darius, feeling like maybe she'd made the right choice after all. In September, her essay about overcoming injury to qualify for Boston was selected for inclusion in a running anthology. The payment was modest, but the validation was enormous. She called her mother to share the news and heard genuine pride in her voice for the first time since she'd quit the law firm. "I didn't think the writing thing would actually work out," her mother admitted, "but you're making it happen. Barely. Some months are better than others." That's true for most creative work. The point is, you're doing it. Jenna hung up feeling lighter than she had in months. She found Darius in the home gym doing pull-ups and interrupted him mid-set. "My mom thinks I'm a real writer now." He dropped from the bar. What changed her mind? The anthology. "I think having my work in an actual book made it legitimate." "You were legitimate before the anthology. I know, but external validation still feels good." He pulled her close, sweaty from his workout, but solid and warm. "I'm proud of you, for taking the risk, for doing the work, for not giving up when it got hard." She kissed him, tasting salt and affection. "I learned that from you." No. You already knew how to be persistent. I just helped you point it in the right direction. In October, exactly 2 years after she'd first walked into Apex Performance Gym, Jenna ran the Chicago Marathon again, not to chase a qualifying time, but to see how different the experience felt now that she wasn't desperate to prove something. She ran relaxed and controlled, finishing in 3:32:16, and felt more satisfied than she had after her qualifier. Darius met her at the finish line with her training journal, the same leather-bound book she'd carried into the gym that first morning, now filled with 2 years of data, documenting her transformation. "I thought you might want this," he said. She took it carefully, flipping through pages that showed the progression from broken mechanics to efficient strength to sustainable speed. The early entries were aspirational and naive. The middle entries showed pain and setback and slow rebuilding. The recent entries reflected consistency and competence. "It's a good story," she said. "It's your story, and it's not finished yet." They spent the weekend in Chicago, celebrating not just the race, but everything that had come from it, the relationship, the career changes, the life they were building together. On Sunday morning, sitting in a coffee shop near their hotel, Darius pulled out a small box. Jenna's breath caught. "What is that?" "I was going to wait until we got home, but this feels like the right moment." He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, white gold with a small diamond. "I'm not good at speeches, so I'll keep this direct. You make me better. You challenge me, you believe in me, you call me out when I'm wrong. I want to spend the rest of my life figuring things out with you. Will you marry me?" She was crying before he finished, nodding through tears. "Yes. Obviously yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. The vulnerability of that small tremor made her love him even more. They sat there for a long time, holding each other while other patrons smiled and congratulated them, the future suddenly concrete instead of abstract. The wedding was small, held at Darius's gym with 30 close friends and family. Jenna wore a simple dress and carried wildflowers. Darius wore a suit that made him look uncomfortable and wonderful. They wrote their own vows, promising to support each other's goals and be honest when things got hard and never stop doing the work required to build something lasting. During the reception, Jenna's editor from the running anthology pulled her aside. "I'm working on another collection," she said. "Personal essays about transformation and identity. I think your voice would fit perfectly. Would you be interested in contributing?" "What's the timeline?" "Draft due in 6 months, publication next fall." Jenna looked across the room at Darius, who was talking to his sister and laughing at something she'd said. 2 years ago she'd been injured and stubborn and convinced she had to do everything alone. Now she was married to someone who'd taught her that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom, and she was making a living doing work that mattered to her. "I'm interested," she told the editor. "Send me the details." The essay she wrote for the collection was about learning to start over. Not just in running, but in life, in career, in relationships. She wrote about the humbling process of admitting you're wrong, the courage required to ask for help, the trust necessary to let someone guide you towards something better. She wrote about the training journal and the gym, and the man who'd refused to let her hurt herself, even when she'd resented him for it. When Darius read the draft, he cried. "This is beautiful," he said. "It's true. That's what makes it beautiful." The essay won an award. Jenna used the prize money to buy a better laptop and committed to writing full-time without the backup of contract legal work. Some months were still tight, but she and Darius made it work through careful budgeting and shared sacrifice. His gym continued to thrive, his client roster full of athletes who wanted the kind of individualized attention he specialized in. They talked about having kids someday, but not yet. First, they wanted to establish their careers more firmly, to travel, to enjoy the freedom of being young and relatively unencumbered. They took a trip to New Orleans to meet Darius's extended family, and Jenna fell in love with the city's food and music and complicated history. They spent a week in Oregon, running trails through old-growth forests, and Darius discovered he actually enjoyed running when it wasn't structured training. Life settled into a pattern that felt sustainable and good. They got a dog, a rescue mutt named Atlas, who loved running and hated being alone. Jenna published a collection of her essays. Darius hired 2 additional coaches and moved his gym to a larger space. They argued sometimes, usually about small things like whose turn it was to grocery shop, or whether they should paint the bedroom grey or blue, but they'd learned how to fight constructively, to address problems instead of avoiding them, to apologize when wrong. On the 3rd anniversary of their first session together, Jenna surprised Darius at the gym with coffee and the original training journal. "I was looking through this last night," she said, "reading the early entries from when I thought I knew everything. You did know everything. You just didn't know how to apply it to your specific body. I was so defensive, so convinced that admitting I needed help meant I was weak." "You weren't weak. You were injured and scared and trying to control the only thing you thought you could control." She set the journal on the front desk, next to the membership contracts and the clipboard with the day's training schedule. "I wanted to thank you, not just for fixing my mechanics, but for seeing who I could become and refusing to let me settle for less." Darius came around the desk and pulled her into a hug. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the tools. We make a good team. The best team." They stood there in the gym where their story had started, surrounded by equipment and the faint smell of chalk and rubber mats, and Jenna felt grateful for the injury that had brought her here. Not because pain was necessary for growth, but because sometimes you had to break down completely before you could rebuild correctly. Sometimes the thing you thought was a catastrophe was actually the beginning of everything good that came after. That evening, they went for a run together, an easy 5 miles through the neighborhood. No watch, no pace goals, just movement and conversation, and the simple pleasure of being outside. When they got home, Jenna pulled out her laptop and started writing a new essay, this one about the difference between training and living, between chasing goals and enjoying the process, between proving something to the world and proving something to yourself. The words came easily, the way they always did when she was writing about something true. Outside, the sun set in shades of orange and pink. Atlas dozed at her feet. Darius moved through the kitchen making dinner, occasionally reading sections of a coaching textbook aloud and asking her opinion. This was the life she'd built by learning to trust someone else, by admitting she didn't have all the answers, by accepting that sometimes the best thing you could do was let someone who knew better show you a different way forward. The training journal sat on the bookshelf, a reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd come. Someday maybe she'd give it to her kids, show them that transformation was possible if you were willing to do the work and humble enough to accept help. Or maybe she'd just keep it, a private record of the time she learned that strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to ask for guidance and having the courage to follow it, even when your ego screamed otherwise. Either way, the story was hers. She'd earned every word.